welcome to the first of a series of monthly webinars. أهلا وسهلا إلى محادثات الشرق الأوسط 2020 وللندوة الشهرية الأولى. Glad to see that many of our partners, graduates, church and ministry leaders and friends of ABTS are joining us. نحن كثير فرحانين إنه نشوف كثير من شركائنا، من طلابنا، من خريجينا، من قادة الكنائس والخدمات المسيحية. We have over 200 participants today from 30 different nationalities joining us. معنا اليوم أكثر من 200 مشارك من 30 دولة. The purpose of these conversations is to lend Middle Eastern voices to the global discourse on urgent matters of faith and witness. هدف هذه المحادثات هي تقديم أصوات من الشرق الأوسط حول مسائل ملحة تسود الخطاب العالمي في الإيمان والشهادة المسيحية. This is a bilingual event, English and Arabic. We will be using the interpretation feature of Zoom to offer translation to both languages, English and Arabic. هذه الندوة رح تكون باللغتين الإنجليزية والعربية، ورح يكون هناك ترجمة فورية للغتين. If you are bilingual, English and Arabic, you do not need to turn on the interpretation feature. You can hear each speaker in the language spoken. إذا كنت تقدر تفهم اللغتين الإنجليزية والعربية، أنت مش بحاجة إنه تستخدم الترجمة الفورية بزوم. فيك تسمع اللغة الأصلية اللي عم يتحدث فيها كل متكلم. If you need translation, click on the interpretation button at the bottom of the Zoom screen and select your channel, English for English speakers and the French channel for the Arabic speakers. إذا كنت بحاجة لترجمة فورية، فيك تكبس على زر التفسير interpretation بزوم من تحت واختار قناة اللغة اللي ترغب سماعها. إذا سماع اللغة العربية بدك تختار اللغة الفرنسية. I now turn it over to Abdul Karim Zainuddin, one of our faculty members who will be moderating this webinar. وهلا رح اترككم مع عبد الكريم زين الدين احد اساتذتنا بالكليه وهو رح يدير هيدي الندوه.
بهيدي الندوه عبر الانترنت. هيدي فرصه لكلنا سوا لحتى نكون عم نحكي سوا وعم نفكر سوا بالقضايا الملحه بهيدا الوقت. بتسعى كلية اللاهوت العربية المعمدانية بلحظة جائحة عالمية محمومة بالأزمات الصحية والتداعيات الاقتصادية وهالاضطراب الواسع والشاسع، تسعى لإشكال العالمي قضايا وازنة ومهمة. احنا من محادثات الشرق الأوسط 2020 بالوقت اللي كنا من 2004 في عنا مؤتمر الشرق الأوسط، وهلا نحن بمحادثات الشرق الاوسط 2020، وهدفها تناقش قضايا بتتعلق بالايمان الكتابي من خلال اجتلاب وجهات نظر من الشرق الاوسط وشمال افريقيا وكمان وجهات نظر عالميه. هيدا كله لالقاء الضوء على فهمنا للتحديات وكمان السانحه بمثل هيدا الوقت. هيك مساهمات، هيك محادثات
help us to raise Middle Eastern voices in global discourse through analysis and debating, conversation and dialogue. In Lebanon, we were influenced and impacted by COVID-19 crisis. And this pandemic is shaking the basics and foundations of life. And today we are on a webinar because we cannot meet face to face. So now we are used not to go to work as we used to do. And maybe we want to be back to the normal that we are used to. It's a historical time. And especially for the church, the global church. So it's time to pause and think and observe what is going on around us and the nature of life. And the impact of this coronavirus, is global. People are more used to live inside their houses. And sometimes we think that life is simpler now. But even in this simple life, we are facing opportunities and we are facing challenges too. And even the situation in the Middle East is an added crisis to the pandemic. It is a precious moment to discover a new insight how we can live our lives in this world in a kingdom mentality and seek to be faithful. So that's why we are glad in this webinar on a dynamic pose, reflections on simplicity, purpose, and transformation in this time of pandemic. The contributors with us today are Martin Akkad, the academic dean at ABTS and the director of IMES, and he will be our keynote presenter, and he will talk to us and he will present for 15 minutes. We are glad to have Rima Nasrallah with us too. She's a lecturer in practical theology in NAST, Beirut, and Dr. Rima will share with us for 10 minutes. And we are also glad to have Dr. Gary Nelson. He is the president of Tyndale Seminary. And he is an author of many books and he is a researcher. Also, he will share with us for 10 minutes and then we will have an opportunity to ask the contributors. We have 20 to 25 minutes and we will have a discussion for 20 minutes. And we won't be able to answer all the questions, but I encourage you all to ask questions. You have down an icon, Q&A icon, so there you can write your questions that we will address in the discussion. We have a poll. So after you finish it, this will help us to present better webinars in the future. So the poll is on your screens. You can answer the questions and then we will see the results.
اسمحوا لي شارككم بنتائج الاستطلاع.
So let me share with you the results of the poll. Would you say your life has been extremely disrupted by the emergence of the coronavirus pandemic? 67% answered yes, and 33% answered no. Has the coronavirus pandemic proven more disorienting and challenging than you initially expected? 69% yes and 31% no. And the last question, do you believe that this moment of history will ultimately lead to good developments in the future? 85% said yes and 15% said no. Thank you for participating in the poll. And now we will have an opportunity to hear to Dr. Martin. He is also a lecturer in Islamic studies and also involved in peace building initiatives between Eastern and Western cultures. And he earned his PhD from Oxford University. Thank you, Abed, and salam, everyone. I'm glad to have this opportunity to start these webinars. I was glad to see the result of the survey that shows that despite of the pandemic and despite of the challenges and difficulties that we are facing, we still have hope for the future. Lebanon has been living a pandemic after the other 4 years, an economic pandemic, a political pandemic, and health pandemic. We have been facing the political pandemic for years, and we are facing politicians that are obsessed with violence, and we are upset. We are hopeless. And how can we face this reality? So I will focus sometimes on the reality of the church and sometimes on our reality as individuals and as families. And I hope that my presentation today will be for us all. So I will first talk about the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on the church. We asked a few of our alumni what challenges they were facing. The most obvious has been not only the practical things, but also the self-understanding of the church itself. And the main challenge is not being able to meet face-to-face and use online platforms to broadcast church services. And many churches around the world are using these online platforms. But also there is a refocus in the church on the family. So heads of households are acting as priests to their families, including the breaking of bread even at home. And as curfews relax from time to time, that we are starting to experience in some countries like Lebanon, the believers first begins by meeting in smaller house churches or fellowship groups, and they are going back to the building of the church. And there are even theological challenges. There is a new sense of solidarity with all the community members. And this was obvious in the questions that we asked to our alumni. Solidarity that is beyond religious affiliation. There is a sense that we are all facing this crisis and we all need the care of one another. And as one of our graduates, now a pastor in Egypt, we are discovering a theology of sharing, empathy, and compassion. We are discovering that God is for all. Also, this pandemic is impacting mission and mission work. And the main question to address here, how do you get sent out when you cannot go? You cannot travel. How do you disciple new believers when you are cut off from them physically and geographically due to quarantine? How will you raise funds or support, when you cannot travel and talk about your ministry, and when supporting churches are also experiencing their own financial problems. There's also an impact on leadership formation, and we are experiencing this as ABTS. How does a seminary adapt to the new normal? And I expect that most theological education programs have gone online. This is what we did as ABTS, but the challenges are great. Leadership formation is not just about transmitting information. It is also about holistic formation. How do you continue to maintain a community from a distance? How do you invest into the lives of new leaders and help mentor them into greater maturity from distance? These are great challenges. We have also to deal with some habits and assumptions in a new way. These persistent habits and assumptions. We assumed that the best church practice took place in a building. And this notion started in the 4th century when the church became an institution in the state, but now have been forced into social distancing and going out of the building. Most churches have shifted their Sunday services as well as other services to online. But is it sufficient just for the pastor to sit at home and record his sermon or broadcast live on Sunday morning? Is it only an item that we are presenting in a new way? Of course, the life of the church and the ministry of the church is more than a Sunday sermon. Also, visitations have been, of course, replaced with phone calls. But are there aspects of being a community of faith that lives out the presence of Christ in society that have fallen by the wayside? The church should rethink and reconsider its being. And how can we go back to the foundations? What does it mean for us to be a church and maintain this notion in the new global normal? And we will have a full webinar dedicated to this topic over the next few months as part of our Middle East conversations. As for mission work, we assume that missionaries had to be called to go overseas to make disciples for all nations and fulfill the Great Commission. Now, with airports closed and with quarantine likely to be imposed for travelers even when we resume traveling, how can we think in mission in a new way? How can we reconsider mission? Should we think of sent out churches into their communities instead of depending on missionaries coming from abroad and external financial support? But what about people and places where there is no church yet? Another Middle East conversation also will focus on this question in the months ahead. The third thing, leadership formation. We assume that the best leadership formation was done in social proximity and through face-to-face interactions in seminaries. We have been doing that for 60 years as ABTS, year after the other. Now we are exploring how it can be done through virtual interaction. It is easy to teach a course online. It is relatively easy to teach a course online. But how can we form leaders online? It's time to think in a new radical way. Do we need campuses? Do we need residential programs? What will we learn and what will we take away with us as permanent changes as a result of this pandemic? And our next webinar in July will be about this topic. There are some positive outcomes of the pandemic. It forced us to slow down. It forced us to take more time with families, to pollute less and live environmentally more responsible, to develop greater empathy and solidarity with those who have less than us, and regardless of who they are. And it forced us to become more moderate in our perception of those who are different from us. Even ISIS issued a warning to its fighters to keep social distance at the beginning of the crisis. They are really being humanistic in their approach. And it forced us to place greater importance on our common humanity than on our differences. But has it done that really? Don't you agree with me that Zoom takes far more time than regular meetings? And we lost our boundaries. There are no more boundaries. No boundaries between family and work. Our family that is all around us, but it is hard to see them because of an unstructured work-life dynamic. No more boundaries between life and family, between work and family. And as soon as we can go again, drive and travel, will we change our habits? Will the environment really benefit from the permanent change of our destructive habits? Will we continue to practice solidarity when the economic crunch continues to bite into us? Or will we turn inward increasingly as resources diminish? Revolutions and popular demonstrations will begin again. And will we fall back into alignment with our traditional party lines? How will our relationship as citizens toward our state be transformed? And if the other ceased to need us, would we need again to affirm our distinctives? Are we serving our societies because we are different and better? Or because we have a liberating good news that liberated us and that we have to joyfully share with others? This is a historical moment of deep crisis that will affect some permanent changes. And we can remember that it happened in history. For example, during world wars in the 20th century, some sort of normal changed after World War. For example, the opening of the workplace to women because so many men were killed in the war. So some sort of normal does return after such global crisis, but some new ways of life remain with us permanently, elements of a new normal. What are these elements of the new normal? And I suggest here to think of three metaphors that that some people use to understand the crisis. The first metaphor is the storm metaphor. This is a bad time and we need to survive so that we can come back to normal afterwards. The question is, how can we hold the rudder as steady as possible so the boat is rocked as little as possible and we can return to normal once the storm has passed? The second metaphor is the tunnel metaphor. And the question that we can ask here, what can we trim so that we can come out alive on the other side? What are the things that we can lose, that we can come out as intact as possible on the other side? The third metaphor is the cocoon metaphor. This is a major crisis in modern world history that will leave permanent marks on our reality. There's no return to normal. There will be a new normal. If you don't transform now, today, you will not be fit for the post-pandemic world. And the question that we address here, how can we muster the best we have? How has God been preparing us for times like this, like these? How can we allow these times to transform us into the best that we are and permanently so that we would at our best when we enter the new normal? So what is the transformation? What is the metamorphosis that we need to undergo so that we come out of the cocoon like a butterfly rather than like a dead caterpillar? This is metamorphosis. It is a striking alternation, according to Merriam-Webster. It is a striking alternation in appearance, character, or circumstances. A typical marked and more or less abrupt developmental change in the form or structure of an animal. And according to Wikipedia, a biological process by which an animal physically develops after birth or hatching, involving a conspicuous and relatively abrupt change in the animal's body structure. So we don't need to just hold our breath and close our eyes until the storm passes. And it's not simply a trimming down. What we need here is a radical transformation, a creative metamorphosis into a beautiful butterfly. And we won't transform from one kind of caterpillar to another kind of caterpillar. We are going to transform from a caterpillar to into a butterfly with wings. So this metaphor of metamorphosis has many things to teach us. Yes, metamorphosis is silent, but it's not tamed. It is revolutionary, and we are witnessing a revolution that will not leave our world as it is now. Maybe we can transform into the best that we are called to be. But if we ignore the warnings of the time, we will not be fit for the new world. And at the end, the way forward. These are my recommendations. For those of us who have experienced a new quality of relationships with our families and friends, we ought to protect and preserve these new habits and relationships. It's time to ask, where do I need better boundaries? How can I organize my work in such a way that it would not obstruct my family life, my time with my spouse and my children, my time with my parents and siblings, my friends all over the world, with whom I have been re-established contact through Zoom or other means. For those of us who travel a lot, we have to think of new ways of reducing our environmental footprints. We are not used to carpooling in Lebanon. Perhaps we should develop a new habit to go as a group by one car. I recently attended a board meeting through Zoom instead of traveling for 3 days to another country. There were about 30 people present. It was a shorter meeting and a more efficient meeting. It saved time, money, and fuel. Will I want to travel again for international board meetings? Perhaps I won't. The third thing I want to say, one of the best practices my family and I acquired recently was to start living on a budget. Carefully monitoring our expenses by using a smartphone application. We used to live month to month, spending what we earned as though those resources belonged to us, often not making it until the end of the month. This crisis has taught us new habits. Spend only what you really need. Put money aside for longer-term quality activities with your family. Redistribute more money to others who have been more affected by the crisis than you have. And these practices are turning into habits. And these habits should turn into values and life principles. All of our resources belong to God. Beyond what we really need, it also belongs to the family of God. And finally, make these changes permanent. So families and individuals that will find themselves doing better in life are people who will really undergo transformation and will keep permanent changes in their lives, and these changes will become values. A word for butterflies. So a word of butterflies. The metaphor of the cocoon is a fitting metaphor to describe our current reality. We await radical, abrupt, conspicuous, and revolutionary transformation. The new normal will not be a world where the caterpillar can survive. It will be a world fit for butterflies. Our new reality will be one of virtuality. And if the caterpillar made its way slowly and safely through a residential life, we are invited to transform through the present cocoon crisis into butterflies that are at ease in virtual life. To these, the sky will be the limit. Thank you, Dr. Martin, for your presentation. It gave us a framework for our discussion and for the coming webinars. Thank you. I want to encourage you to ask questions in the Q&A icon, and our contributors will answer these questions, Dr. Martin, Dr. Rima, and Dr. Gary. It's also an opportunity for Dr. Rima to share with us for 10 minutes And I want to tell you that Dr. Rima Nasrallah is an assistant professor of practical theology at NAST, and she holds a PhD in liturgical ritual studies from the Protestant Theological University. Dr. Rima gives special attention to gender, context, performance, and the arts. Dr. Rima, thank you for your contribution, and we are looking forward to hearing from you. Thank you, Abid, and thank you for ABTS for this webinar and this important topic to address. I'm very happy to be with you today, and even if it is virtually. Dr. Martin, I want to thank you for the way you addressed this issue. It's a need in this historic time that is bringing to us a new feeling that we have to deal with. You described the situation in a detailed way. Yes, the pandemic that forced us to stay home, it made us take some time to relax, and it gave us a Sabbath. So the globe is taking a break from human activity, and there's more focus on the health of human being, and we arranged our priorities in a new way. You mentioned that quarantine was a time to strengthen our relationships as families, to spend more time with children, and to discover the luxury of simplicity. And it was also time to rethink our priorities in church. So it's this time for us to care for services or for the health of believers. And as we were trying to find an alternative. The alternative was, should we focus more on social communication? Should we focus on Zoom and other applications that will help us? And shall we only focus on broadcasting our services? And we found ourselves behaving in a new way that we didn't expect. Yes, we learned so many things as individuals, as families, and as churches, even as organizations. We acquired new skills for doing ministries from a distance, and even we learned how to cut our hair by ourselves. Maybe this experience was not the same for everyone. While some people were taking this time as a break, for many in the MENA region, this was the beginning of a crisis. And this stage showed that there are distinctives between people. People cannot spend their time watching Netflix, but we witness an increasing cases of domestic violence. CAFA, an organization that is for domestic violence, reported that the number of cases is multiplied by 3. Spouses that decided to divorce increased. And old people were more isolated, and it's more difficult to cure them from their illnesses. Yes, this pandemic created solidarity, but at the same time, it created boundaries. Fear that we live with fear not only from the future, but also from the other that is coming from another country, from a neighboring country. And even stereotyping is more relevant. And we also see differences in skills between people. Although technology opened a new way for communication, but it was not equal for all the people around the world. Internet connection, electricity, and applications and appliances are not equal for all people. They don't have equal access to them. And older people were isolated. So we see that older teachers in educational institutions were not able to adapt. And also this crisis revealed economic differences and discrepancies. People who earn their wages on daily basis, they lost their jobs and their economic resources. Martin mentioned that many consider this pandemic as a storm. Others consider it as a tunnel. And we were all living these metaphors. We thought that we have to adapt so that we can reach the light on the other side. I think your suggestion for the metaphor of the cocoon and for metamorphosis, I see it as a beautiful metaphor. We don't want to go back to what we used to be, but we want to use youth to restructure our jobs, our families, our communities, and our churches. And it's time to transform. It's a unique opportunity for transformation. But can we experience a radical transformation? Can we experience survival in quarantine? Can we expect a core transformation just by the fact that we are now locked inside our houses? It's an anthropological and a theological question. And I want to approach it from a theological point of view and from a reformational point of view. This transformation is difficult and even impossible in our world. Despite the beauty of a butterfly, for a reformational theology, it's difficult to reach while we are facing our challenges. So this time also showed us that our systems are a failure. And what we experience today is the result of corruption. So instead of guarding ourselves to protect the health of human beings, countries spend their money on arming their soldiers to fight wars. And we are struggling with capitalism that does not care for the weak and for the poor. So what we are facing today is due to the broken creation that we live in. So what? Do I call to I'm not telling you to just sit and accept sin. Maybe my experience was not as hopeful as others, but I use this metaphor of cleaning metals that under high temperature. We can see failure, and we can see the black side, the dark side of our communities in this pandemic. And sometimes we feel that change is impossible. So it's not only our role is not only to point the dark sides of our communities. We are called to face social injustice, to face racism that we see in the West and in our Lebanese families, especially during quarantine when domestic workers are on the streets. We are called to make choices using skills that we learned during this period. So maybe what I'm saying now is not very different from what Martin was saying, but I choose a different metaphor here. But I would like to, but I'm less optimistic than the speaker and than the audience. How can we transform from one situation to another that is completely different? How can we be butterflies? I have hope in God, great hope in God. He calls us for transformation, for a constant transformation, until we reach astrologically to the image that He wants us to reach. So what I'm saying today is in harmony with what Martin was saying. But our trust should not be in man. We cannot say that we can make this change because we always live in this cycle of sin. We have to depend on God so that we can reach what He wants us to reach.
شكرا دكتور ريما على إضاءتك للجانب
Thank
الآخر.
you, Dr. Rima, for highlighting a new point in our discussion.
غمار هالمحادثة. كمان بدي
So,
أذكركم
during this conversation, I want to remind you to ask questions, and we will have time to hear answers and responses from our contributors.
Now we introduce Dr. Gary. Dr. Gary Nilsson, as we said, is the President and Vice Chancellor of Tyndale University and has served in various pastoral roles, including as head of the International Mission and Development Organization, Canadian Baptist Ministries. Gary finds passion in creating new ways through which congregations and organizations can optimize their abilities and capacities to bridge into communities in chaotic and changing times. He is committed to helping organizations impact their local communities and the worlds of which they are a part. We welcome you, Dr. Gary, and we look forward to hear from you as well.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here. I think one of the things that the pandemic has done is it's made us wish that we would see each other face to face because we've been so solitary. But I want to thank Martin for doing what he consistently does so well. He somehow always is able to succinctly and clearly map out the landscape of the world in which we find ourselves in at a particular time. At the same time, he has a wonderful way of shaping comments theologically in such a way that what could have been an intellectual musing turns actually out to be real and practical. So I want to thank you for that, Martin. I agree with the themes that you unpack in your paper. In fact, I think it accurately describes the circumstances of COVID-19's impact on us as a university and a seminary at Tyndale. Our institution was focused to respond rapidly to the changes that were happening all around us. We were forced to do that. The chair of our board, who is a creative and skilled entrepreneur, once stated to our board about 8 years ago, he said, the pace of change is faster than the pace of learning. And at no time has that been more apparent than in these last 4 months. We're not in control. We're not in control of the changes that are taking place around us. And in fact, the challenges impacted us at Tyndale on a daily basis as politicians tried to respond to the unknown that they were facing and were really basically working in the dark. We didn't have the luxury of time. Within 2 days of our provincial government's decision to close campuses, we had to move quickly onto an online delivery of courses and distributed learning frameworks. Our advantage in this shift is that we had been working on philosophical and curriculum frameworks for almost 15 years on a distributed kind of framework. And we've been able to experiment over the last 15 years in developing what we thought were creative services for faculty and students that address the learning outcomes and the community and student participation. But in these last few months, much of our energy has been spent forecasting possibilities for the fall and dealing with the questions to whether or not we could open the campus once again. However, through it all, these logistical questions that we were facing, we were all well aware that things would not return to the way they were. Our moorings had been taken away. Malcolm Gladwell, in his book, The Tipping Point, makes an interesting observation. He defines a tipping point as the point in which a series of small changes and incidents become significant enough to cause a larger, more important change. In my book, Leading in Disorienting Times, we talk about those incidents and changes as disorienting dilemmas. In my, that's what I think is happening to us today. We are facing disorienting dilemmas that impact theological education, as you pointed out, family, ecclesiology, and even organizational structures. We've literally, as Gladwell says, been tipped over into this new world. And the challenge before us is the nurturing of some kind of ability to navigate and negotiate this world with courage and resilience. Much of the language in North America during this time of COVID-19 has been framed around the idea that we are moved into a new normal. I want to suggest that this new normal has been a reality that we have been facing for a long time. For us in North America, COVID-19, the financial crisis, and now the Black Lives Matter politics have simply tipped us over the edge and spilled us out on the other side with absolutely no ability to return to the world that we once held dear. The global nature of the health crisis, the financial and the economies and the push in North America to address systemic racial bias and prejudices have been deeply embedded in our society for years. Things which were implicit and unspoken in the past through COVID-19 and all of the other things taking place cannot be escaped anymore. They've now become explicit. It is as though now they have been named and they have been made real. In North America, our ecclesiologies, so deeply rooted in Christendom foundations, are inadequate to address the new world we now find ourselves in. The superficialities of our theological underpinnings have been revealed in the politics of the day, where powers and principalities hold too tight a grip on our expressions of faith and mission. And that's why I appreciate Martin's idea of metamorphosis, where a striking alteration in appearance, character, or circumstances takes place. I believe that we are in the cusp of this possibility. And the challenge will be whether or not we will be willing to embrace the opportunities this new world is setting before us. In the book of Joshua, in the Hebrew, this is called habar. In English, it's translated crossing over. Almost 21 times in the first 4 chapters of Joshua, we are presented with this idea of crossing over, and continually, God reminds the people of God that we have not been this way before. Consistently, we are told they will not be able to go back as they begin to cross over the Jordan into the promised land. And I think this same crossing over culturally and globally is the challenge that we face today in theological institutions, in churches, and even in para-church Christian organizations, family, and all of the other things that Martin has outlined. The leadership issue, it seems to me, is simply framed in one idea. Are we willing to cross over? Are we willing to make this choice? Peter Drucker, the management guru, had a wonderful quote that he would use when organizations were facing these times of change and challenge. He somehow understood that there is a choosing that must take place, and our choices will either open us up to the new things or they will cause us to stagnate in what was. He used to say this. He used to say, culture eats strategy for breakfast. It was his way of saying that unless the organization is willing to challenge all that they once knew, unless they are willing to question the old and comfortable assumptions that they've kind of embodied and lived in, with new ideas and strategies, then somehow nothing can be made real in this metamorphosis that Martin has been talking about. I believe we're in a time like this. I believe that we're on the verge of vast changes that have needed to take place for a long time. And what we are simply in the time of is a time of choosing. Martin has outlined the possibility of what this might look like. And I am simply suggesting that there is a profound choosing that must take place. Great ideas, new strategies to face a new normal are always about choices. Are we willing to question the assumptions that we have held sacred in our thinking? Or will we instead want to return, or at least put our energy into returning to that which we know and feel comfortable about? Are we too invested in the way things were that the way things might be are too risky or frightening? Are we willing to embrace the what might be of the present and future, even with the risk that we might be wrong? It takes courage to face a time like this, and it's particularly challenging, it seems to me, for leaders. Yet it's in times like this that the great reformations, renewals, and cultural changes were given birth. It was leaders such as Wilberforce, Mandela, Calvin, Wesley, you name yours, who created movements that altered the worlds they were part of. They dared to think what might be in the swirling chaos of the worlds that they were in. And this is probably where Martin and I agree the most about the metamorphosis metaphor. Yes, while the process for the caterpillar to become a butterfly might look like it is silent and it is not tame, it is the metamorphosis that we need today. However, the problem with the metamorphosis metaphor is that the caterpillar innately and intuitively enters the metamorphosis stage. It really, it's rather, and it creates a radical change for this time. I believe it will take a revolutionary and earth shifting as we fight the principalities and powers that would like to remain the way it was. We agree, Martin, that to ignore these warnings that are taking place all around us will keep us, the church, theological institutions, and organizations, from being fit for a new world. God is saying, behold, I'm about to do a new thing. Can you see it? But this is not intuitive to us, and neither is it innately part of our being. And the question that we must ask is, will we choose to enter the process? Will we choose metamorphosis, or will we embrace the past? It seems to me that what your paper presents to us is a profound and a sacred choice that has been placed before us. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gary, for your contribution. Thank you, Dr. Martin, as well, Dr. Rima. Now, this is the time for all of us to think together as well by trying to answer the questions that a lot of you put here in the question and answer. I again encourage you to put more questions, to send more questions as we discuss these questions together. Allow me to start with this question, and this is for you, Dr. Martin. The question says, thank you for your 3 helpful metaphors. Are there any biblical metaphors that might prove helpful towards understanding the present situation? He adds, I thought of one. We are mere pilgrims in the world. Any biblical metaphors that support your own metamorphosis metaphor?
Thank you very much. I'm also burning to address some of the important questions and challenges that I heard from both Rima and Gary. So thank you so much for complimenting some of the things and some of the gaps I left. But to address the question, Abid, from the audience, I actually had to skip my biblical metaphor because of time was running so fast. I was going to, of course, the pilgrim metaphor is an interesting one because it implies this passing through and this the fact that we don't belong ever to the world of the caterpillar, but that we are on our way to becoming a butterfly. But some of my favorite metaphors are found in Matthew 13, and I would have mentioned the mustard seed and the leaven, which in Jesus's description of these metaphors or use of these metaphors for as symbols of the kingdom of God or metaphors of the kingdom of God, they talk about something small that becomes powerful and transforming. They speak about the smallest seed. We know scientifically it may not be, but in the world that Jesus is speaking to, this tiny seed that, after it dies in the ground, rises to become this huge tree that is able to draw all the birds of the air to find shade in its branches, or this little leaven that you put in the flour and then it gives a large quantity of dough. These are metaphors of radical, powerful transformation from something very small that dies or disappears in the case of the leaven, and then comes out and gives something that is a symbol of life, a symbol of hospitality, a symbol of transformation, a symbol of good news, of invitation. Now, so these would be the metaphors I would like from the Bible to equate to what I use here. But this gives me occasion to reflect quickly on what Rima reminded us so importantly about the reality of suffering that is also part of this cocoon pandemic that we're living in. And I wanted to focus on the power of transformation that leads to resurrection. And so the power of the resurrection that is symbolized so nicely in this and powerfully in this move from out of the cocoon into the butterfly. But I realize that sometimes our little conversations, intellectual conversations, are a bit of a, they're a bit of a luxury. They belong to, you know, to a world of that is at ease, to a society that's economically more comfortable. And I'm very aware and in touch with the other side of this world. And when Rima was speaking, I was reminded that even the incredibly powerful good news of the birth of Jesus and of the coming into the world of salvation through a savior was also accompanied by the massacre of the children of Bethlehem. And for some reason, there seems to be this universal rule that for when something incredible is about to happen, it is often accompanied by terrible suffering. And Jesus himself does not remain simply the God of victory or of life or resurrection, raising people from the dead or healing from sickness, but Jesus, at the end of this life of a miracle working, ends up on the cross, and in the grave. Yet after this death also, there is the resurrection. And so, although I believe that, and I had to look up this Masbak al-Ma'dan and found out that in English it is the foundry. So I believe that the cocoon that I use, this metaphor of the cocoon, is actually the foundry. This metamorphosis that happens there, this transformation in character and appearance of an animal after its birth, needs no less than a foundry, this incredible transformation. That is the cocoon. But after this moment of stillness, there is the possibility and the hope for transformation, resurrection, and the butterfly world.
Thank you, Dr. Martin. Dr. Rima or Dr. Gary, would you like to add comment on any of that?
Rima?
Yeah. Yeah, of course, also in the academic world, we also try to play around with our metaphors and then try to see what works and what doesn't work. Or what, and every metaphor has its limitations. So whatever metaphor we're going to come up with, it will have its shortcomings. My concern was only not to, this idea to feel that after this, something great is going to happen by itself. And I know that in times in history, we had moments when great things happened, and then there was a shift after that. And it's always a shift, but a real true transformation that takes us from darkness to light, from a terrible situation into a shining future. This is where I had the hesitation, and that's the metaphor of the butterfly transmits something of that, and that's where I hesitate, because I know, and I think we all know that a transformation like this is just too good to be true, and it is promised. It's a promise in the gospel, like the examples that Martin gave. They are there, but for me they are eschatological, because even the discovery of the printing press, I mean the development of the printing press, wonderful as it was, it gave good things and it gave bad things. And then we had to figure out how to deal with it, how to use it, how to harness it, but also how to use it critically and be critical of it. And that's also now a moment when we have the same thing. World War II opened the way for women in the working field, but it also led to the collapse of the family and family values. And then also Europe had to figure out again how to deal with this and how to reorganize families. So that's how that's why I'm hesitant about it. But it's a wonderful metaphor.
I like your
Dr. Gary, on this scale between the worm and the butterfly, where do you put yourself?
I'm actually in Rima's camp because I think I think it's an eschatological promise. We're living in the hope of we're living in the age to with one foot in the age to come and with one foot in the reign of Christ that has been brought to earth through Christ. So in all of these things, change, the only people who like change are the ones who are in control of it, you know, because they're the ones that are actually making it happen. But I think for so many others, losses to some of the things that we see as great possibilities. There's losses for some people in the midst of that. But then I think you pointed out in the midst of the pandemic, which has been good for some families, it's become dark and shadowy for so many other people in the midst of it. It's what has been cracks in families now have become large crevices and things like that. So I do think there's an eschatological promise to anything that is change in the within the church's understanding and theological understanding.
Thank you. Thank you. Here's a question for any of you. Do you think we are really ready to let go of the structures we have put in place for many years? That is, titles, hierarchies that display our status, buildings that stack out our piece of territory?
Well, I'll just leap in on this one. As the president of an academy, an institution, in a world in which the whole academy model is in question, I think the people who find it the hardest to think about making changes in that are probably the people who have played the game, made it into their world, and now have position and place within that. And then all of a sudden you come along, the president comes along and says, okay, we need to change. And they're saying, well, just a second, I played the game, I got to this point, I'm now here. I'm not sure I want to let go of this. And I think faculty struggle with that. When you start saying theological education, leadership formation needs to change, they may very well even feel that that's okay, but they have much more to lose in the change than to gain in the midst of it. So I think that's the challenge. I think people who are in the midst of the structures, denominational leaders, mission organizations, you name them, they have so much to lose in moving to a different model, funding framework.
I agree. I think change is never easy. And in fact, we all struggle with it. There's always an experience of death with change, of mourning, of grief, when you have to let go of something. The disciples took a while until they were able to understand and accept the reality of the death of their hope and understand that the resurrection was, yes, eschatological, yet had a profound meaning for them. And I think in the end of the day, change is always personal. And it's by allowing change to happen in our person that we can begin to change a small community. And that's the power of the church. And then that community can be a grain of a mustard seed or leaven for society. And I think that's, but it always comes back to us, and are we willing to change? And that's why in my concluding thoughts, I even highlighted some very personal things. You know, can we change the way we spend our money? Can we start spending what we absolutely need so we can redistribute what we have beyond that? Can we start thinking that our money belongs to God rather than to us, and then to the people of God rather than just to us? And by people of God, I don't just mean the church, I mean His creation. Mm-hmm. And I think only by being transformed ourselves can we begin to see transformation happening around us. And I really like what you said, Gary, you know, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I think that if we do not develop a culture in organizations that is willing to change, then our strategies just go out the window when the reality imposes itself on us.
Mm-hmm. Rima, would you like to add something?
If I would comment on this, of course, we're speaking about change in many different places. Speaking of change in institutions, meaning to say embracing new technology, embracing online teaching, or doing webinars instead of seminars. Of course, this is something that many of us or many institutions have been going towards doing such things, but very slowly. And what happened in the past 3 months is that it had been accelerated. And those who had other reasons not to do this couldn't find any more, couldn't argue with it anymore. They had to face it. Churches also, for a very long time now, we've been looking at churches live streaming, or churches also creating online communities, or recording, broadcasting, whatever it is. So we have been seeing these small steps of change happening on that level, but now it accelerated. Other areas of life that need change, I think also, again, a lot of voices have been alerting us for some time, you know, change your lifestyle, change the economy, change the political structures, change our ecological behavior. And again, now we had time, we had 3 months to think, well, maybe it is possible, or maybe some things are possible. Will we change? Will we remove hierarchies and structures? I'm not sure we have enough to fall on yet. I mean, we will be changing, but we should start. I think the next step from here is now to think what else could take its place. So what else could carry it? What political structures, what economic systems that will take the place of what we used to have? And that's the direction. It's going to be a long process, I think. It's a long journey of figuring out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you, Rima. Following up the theme of change, here is a question about change. Did our views to mission change because of the pandemic? And if so, how? Maybe this is a big question. We only have 5 minutes and time is flying like an eagle, maybe not like a butterfly, Martin. It's flying fast. So let's do that. And then maybe one last question for the three of you. What about missions? How did that change, if it did? And if it is in this process of changing, how is that happening? How can you envision that towards the future because of COVID-19?
Can I propose, Abid, that we postpone that question, because we are going to have an entire conversation in a couple of months on the subject of mission. It's such a big question, unless Rima or Gary have something to add real quick.
No, not me.
It is such a big question. Yes, we only have a few more minutes now. Let me pose this question then, and it has to do with vulnerables, persecuted areas. What effect has the pandemic had on believers living in areas where they are also facing persecution? Completes and he asks, how can we stand and maybe help them, pray for them? Any of you would like to share? Maybe this is a personal question. Maybe it could be applied on an institutional level, seminaries, universities, churches. So maybe it has so many different angles to be tackled through.
Well, I guess, I mean, as a North American, I probably have no right to talk about any of this. But I would say that if as the UN defines, one of their definitions of poverty is lack of access. And in the move to, I mean, in the idea that technology is going to be the next thing, if I don't have access to that technology, if I don't have access to those possibilities, if I don't have access, just like I don't have access to economics and things like that, not having access to what supposedly is the radical revolutionary new thing, it seems to me just creates a greater and greater gap that is hard for us to bridge in the midst of it. And I think that's probably one of my greatest fears in the midst of this change, is that the gaps will get wider because access to the things that make the gaps possible, the changes possible, aren't available.
Rima, Martin, would you like to add anything? We might only have 3 more minutes to do so.
I want to say that one of the things that this pandemic has done is that it has somewhat leveled the field in many areas. And I think one of them is the level of suffering. What I mean, I'm not saying that everyone is suffering the same way from the pandemic. What I'm saying is that the suffering is disregarding things like religious belonging or maybe ethnic background, or again, we could argue with that, because ethnic minorities often suffer more in times like these. But because of the magnitude of the suffering, the particular question of, for instance, persecuted Christian minorities or other religious minorities, I think is less accentuated in times like these. I think, minorities that have been persecuted in the past, or that usually are persecuted, can rise up to the occasion of crises like that and actually play a positive, constructive, loving role in their society. So I think these groups need to find opportunities to be different, to be to play a positive role, and that is possible with only a little. And so you don't need to have great resources to be able to help your neighbor or to be next to your neighbor in times like these. I see this more as an opportunity for those minorities than as a particularly difficult time of persecution. But for ethnic groups, as Rima pointed out also, like the domestic workers that have been abandoned or sent away or unpaid for months and these sorts of things. Well, this is where our role is. Again, we need to reach out to people who are in this situation, regardless of who they are, their ethnicity, where they come from, what ideology they belong to.
One of the things that I wonder about, Martin, Rima, is right now in North America with the Black Lives Matters and the whole discussion around systemic Black racism, has COVID-19 create an incubator in which that issue became more real because we were in this kind of nowhere time, and as a consequence we've heard it in a different way because we were listening in a different way. And I haven't got an answer for that, but it's one of the questions that goes on in my own kind of mind as we've been dealing with those issues both at the university but also in our culture and society.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Gary. Any last words from you, Rima?
No, that's too short to say last words. Thank you.
Maybe for next time, and next webinars. Thank you, Dr. Gary, Dr. Rima, and Dr. Martin, panelists, and thank you all who were part of this. We had so many questions. We are very sorry not being able to answer all your questions, but we were able to highlight few and get the main ideas there. I don't know if you have got a lot from this, but I personally, I'm looking forward for our next webinar in the days to come. So thank you again. Before we wrap this up, allow me to remind you of a survey. We have a survey that will be sent towards you at the end. I hope that you will be able to fill out that survey. It will help us to do better, prepare better for our next webinars. Speaking of our next webinars, our next webinar is on July 16, 2020, again from 4 till 5:30 p.m. Beirut time. The title of the webinar is COVID-19 and Theological Education in the Middle Eastern Context Between Mounting Challenges and Emerging Opportunities. Next week, we will open the registration for our next webinar. And in God's will, we see you then. Thank you.